Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining the People in Clinical Trials webinar with myself, Victor. I see we have a few people that have already joined. More people will be joining and I will accept them as we go. So we've been away for 2 weeks now and it feels so good to be back. And today we have a very interesting presentation with Dr. Tasanya, and her presentation is titled The Trials, Tribulations, and Adventures of an Investigator. So we'll be taking comments and questions at the end of a presentation, and I encourage everyone to interact with us. So if you have a comment or question at the end, please feel free to unmute yourself and then ask a question or give a comment. And without wasting any more time, I would like to hand over to Tasanya to start with a presentation.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, thanks, Victor, for giving me the chance to speak on your platform. And I know that there's really few people here, so don't be discouraged. Things always start small, but I hope that whoever is here is going to learn from whatever we're going to chat about today. So yeah, thanks, Victor, for that. So I'm going to share my screen. So what we're going to do is I'll have a short presentation. Sorry, Victor, you disabled screen sharing. Can you just enable it again, please? And then I'll share.
Okay, let me try that.
Okay, in the meantime, so what we'll do, guys, is I'll give a short presentation, and then after that, you can ask whatever questions you want to ask. And yeah, cool.
Okay. It seems like I will have to make you the host. So
Okay, no problem.
Just monitor the participants when they come in, just to accept them as well.
Okay. If I'm sharing my screen, will I be able to see?
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
All right. All right, there you go.
Cool, thanks. Okay. Okay. Okay, guys, so sorry. Okay, so as Victor said, my name's Tasanya, and he's asked me to come and present on what investigators do in trials. So if you like word games, my presentation is called The Trials, Tribulations, and Adventures of an Investigator. So my background, I'm a doctor by profession, but I'm taking a year off to do my master's in implementation science and epidemiology. But before I did that, I was working in trials, and that's why I'm going to be speaking to you today about what I used to do. So this is the outline of what we're going to talk about. We're going to look at basics of clinical trials, possible parts and qualifications that you would need if you want to get involved, the roles and responsibilities of an investigator, and also looking at what is your why and some advice or overall experience, and then we'll go to questions. Okay. If there's anything along the way that you really don't get, you are welcome to stop me, and we can do that. Okay, so what are clinical trials? So clinical trials are basically just studies that are designed to look at different interventions and what the outcomes are in humans. So an intervention can be a medical intervention, a surgical intervention, a behavioral intervention. We're looking at what happens to health outcomes when we have these interventions, okay? So why do we do them? To look at why we do them, you can look at the 4 phases of trials, and that will kind of help you to understand why we do them. So the first phase, phase 1 trials, are safety trials, okay? And they basically done in a very small group of people. You just want to see if this, in this case, let's just say we're using a drug. Our intervention is a new treatment or a new drug. We want to see if that's safe for people to take, okay? The phase 2 trials are trials that are looking at if this thing actually works. So there have been lab trials that were done before that, but now you need to see in the human body if this works. The phase 3 trials are looking at these interventions compared to standard of care. So compared to what we actually have now, is it better than what we have, or does it not work as well? Or if we have nothing, we'd compare to placebo. So the point of that is because if you get to a stage where you find this new intervention doesn't work as well as the things that you have already, there might not really be a point in putting your resources into investigating it further. Oh, sorry. So to give you the logic, I'm sure a lot of people here already understand what trials are, but to give you the logic of clinical trials, if you have, let's just say we were looking at we found new vitamins called vitamin X and vitamin Y, and we wanted to see if adding these vitamins onto TB treatment would lead to better outcomes in TB patients. So what we would do is something called a randomized control trial, right? Which is like basically the gold standard, the best kind of evidence that you can get. So the word randomized basically means that people are put into different groups by chance. Just it's done usually on a computer or with some kind of software. They just put into these groups with whatever. It's completely random. And then the second part of it is that we have a control group. So which means that these are people who either have standard of care or placebo that we're going to compare our current intervention group to, okay? So in that case, we would have, what we would do is to compare at the end, compare our TB treatment outcomes, okay? If you saw in group 1 that had vitamin Y, that they had a lot less side effects than vitamin X had a lot less side effects than vitamin Y, and they did very well, then you know that that vitamin is probably better when added to TB treatment. If you looked at that first group and compared it to the third group that didn't have any vitamins added, and you found that maybe the first group got better much more quickly, their CT scans looked a lot better, their X-rays showed a lot less residual damage, then you would know that if the only difference in our groups is the fact that the one group got this vitamin, the other one didn't, you'd be able to say that the changes or the improvements in the outcome is most likely due to the thing that has been changed, which is the addition of the vitamin. So that's the logic behind clinical trials, okay? So current examples now would be the recovery trial that's happening for COVID, where we're looking at different treatment outcomes for people who've been given a different kind of treatments that either modulate the immune system or or antivirals, whatever it is. And then the second one is a COVID prevention study, which we're doing. As you guys know, we're one of the sites that are testing out the Oxford vaccine study. So those are examples of RCTs that are going on at the moment. And then the next question is this ethical? And this is such a big question to answer that I don't really think we can't even go. We need a whole different thing on this, and I'm sure you guys have had an ethics webinar. But the short answer is that all trials that are passed have to go through a very rigorous ethics process. And if there's any kind of anything unethical or any detriment to the patient or anything that makes the patient suffer, the trial really will not be passed. The second thing is that you as an investigator will be responsible for ensuring that your trial, every step of your trial is done ethically. And so it's really a continuous job that you have to do. Okay, then the paths that you can take, you can either do clinical or you can be a clinical investigator, or you can also be non-clinical PI, right? So you don't have to be a doctor to be an investigator. So for me, I took the pre-specialization path, which means that I didn't do any form of like medical specialization. I went from my conserv, I did a bit of private practice, and then I worked in clinics, and then I found myself in a trial setting. I didn't even know what trials were at the time. So I hadn't specialized. So I wasn't, because I had worked in HIV and TB before, I was able to work on HIV and TB trials. However, if you wanted to do something like look at new treatments for childhood cancers, you would probably have to be a pediatric oncologist, especially if you wanted to design your own trials and submit your own protocols. You would need to specialize and then start trials. So that's another path that you can take. And then people also do post-grad studies like an MSc in clinical trials, where you don't have to be a doctor to do that. You can do a BSc and an honors in something science related, and then you can do your master's in clinical trials. So if you're a non-clinical PI, you can still be involved, but you just won't be able to see the patients as a doctor, but you can still be a PI on a study. So there's many ways with anything in life, there's many ways to get where you want to get or to do what you are interested in. On the other side, I've just put some qualifications that you would need once you start them. So I'm sure you guys have covered GCP and even the ethics courses, and then there's trial-related qualifications that you would need, such as your being trained on your protocols and your study procedures. And I just put at the bottom that it's really wise to keep your emergency or life support courses up to date because you are going to need them. Okay, so the roles and responsibilities. So this is just my division. This is not like a formal thing. I've just categorized what I did at work into these 3 areas, right? So you have the clinical part of your job, the administrative part of your job, and then your management or leadership part of it. So with the clinical roles, what you'd have to do is obviously see your patients as in your normal doctor role, but you'd also have to try and screen and enroll patients to find people who are suitable for your studies. You would have to look for side effects, for adverse events, manage those. And you'd also, a very important part of it is deciding which of these adverse events are related to your study product and which are not. And this is important because let's just say you get a vaccine, and then 5 days later you go home and you develop this rash. But also on that same day that you got the vaccine, you decided to eat something that you don't normally eat, and you felt really sick, and then you got the rash after that as well. So we would need to figure out, is this rash due to your vaccine or is it due to something else? And there are guidelines and criteria that can help you to decide this, but it's not an easy thing to do. It's something that you have to learn. And it's really important because if you keep saying that, if you want to be very, very cautious, like when I first started, I wanted to be really cautious and say everything was related to the study product because I was scared to make a mistake. But if you're going to say everything's related to study product, you might have a chance that there's a really good product that's not going to be passed because you keep saying that there's so many side effects when they're actually not related. And on the other hand, if you're not cautious enough, then we could be seeing a case where you're passing a product where we haven't recorded all the possible side effects that can happen. So you have to be really careful with that kind of stuff. Then you would also do your other trial procedures, whether it's collecting samples or like bloods or rectal samples, vaginal samples, whatever swabs, you have to do that kind of stuff, okay? And then obviously you have to monitor and follow up your patients. The administrative duties that you would have are a lot more than what I think a lot of doctors don't. This is the part that you don't like about trials because you're not used to it. There's a lot of paperwork. In a normal clinic setting, the only paperwork you have is to write your patient notes, write your prescription, and you're done. But in this setting, you have a lot of CRFs, they call case report forms, that you have to fill in. And sometimes you really will feel like you're just being a data collector in a clinic and you're not really seeing patients or being a doctor. But unfortunately, that's something that you have to do because in order for us, if you understand research, in order for you to have good quality data, you need to have many data points about the same thing. So you can recognize patterns, you can compare things. So it has to be repetitive. And so it can feel a little bit frustrating sometimes, but it's just part of the administrative part of your job. And also what you have to realize is something that can take you 10 minutes in a clinic can take you 20 minutes in a trial setting. So let's just take something like pregnancy. In a normal clinic, if a patient's pregnant, you get the results back, you counsel the patient, you help her to make a plan of what she wants to do. You refer her either to antenatal clinic or to TOP if she wants that. And that it can be really quick. But in a trial setting, a pregnancy is a really, really huge deal. And it's considered an adverse event, a very serious one. And there's a whole bunch of forms you have to fill in. You have to inform the sponsor. You have to monitor that patient. It's a lot more than you would normally be doing in a clinic. So that's, sorry, I'm just admitting people. So that's what's different, okay? And then you also have to, part of your administrative tasks is to resolve queries, which people also don't like. A query is basically when you make a mistake or there's something that maybe the quality guys don't understand about what you've written. They will flag it for you and you have to go and correct it or explain it. And so that's resolving your queries, right? Then the last part is your management or your leadership duties that you would have to do. In a normal clinic setting, you wouldn't really, you'd be responsible for your junior doctors maybe, but you're not going to be responsible for the nurses because they have their own manager, or for the general assistants. You're not really doing that. But in a trial setting, you are responsible for your entire team, and that's part of your management responsibilities. You also have to attend meetings on behalf of your PI. You would have to try and train if there's a new protocol and people need training on it, then you would need to do that. Sorry, guys. You would do feasibility studies. So, for example, that would be looking at, is your site appropriate to run a study or to be submitted for a study? So you do that kind of stuff. You provide clinical supervision to whoever is in your team, and you'd also just coordinate your team. You also get to do fun stuff like engage with your community. Like, for example, during our our TB studies. We had it was TB day, and we got to go into our community and had a whole program with them. So it's a lot of fun. You also get to do a lot of fun stuff. Yeah. So the next one, I'm not going to spend too long on this. It's basically, what is your why? And you just need to decide why are you doing this? Do you see trials as a way of, as a place of comfort or an easier lifestyle, or do you really want to make a difference with your work? Do you understand what the job is going to entail? You need to understand why you want to be involved in trials, what area of research you like. You can't just be running away from specializing, or you can't just be bored of your practice, or you don't know what to do, because you're really just going to be unhappy because you're going from one place of not knowing to another place where you're just going there because you don't know what to do. So these are some misconceptions about trials that I have heard when I was working there. And I'm sure you guys have probably heard some of these as well. So most of them are just not true. The first thing is that it's not clinical. People think that it's not a clinical job. You're not practicing as a doctor, which is completely false. It's 100% clinical, and it just has added expectations. So you still need to know your emergencies. You're still going to get emergencies in clinic. You're still going to have to deal with everything a normal doctor has to deal with. It just might be a little bit more stressful because some of these things, you can't just go to your book and say, oh, what are the side effects of this medication? Because nobody knows. You're the one finding that out. The second misconception is that it's not stressful. This is really false. So usually it is a lot less stressful than a random Friday night on call in casualty. It's definitely less stressful than that, but it's also a different kind of stress that you have. You're dealing with different things. You're dealing with sponsors. You're dealing with drugs that you've never had experience with before. You're dealing with really major adverse events. So it's a different kind of stress. And sometimes, like that picture in the middle is actually a picture that one of the doctors that I work with, we sent it to each other one day, because that's exactly how clinic felt one day. It felt like everything was burning around us, but we had to just be fine and see our patients and tell them that everything was fine. And you are going to have days like that. So trials is not a place to go if you don't like stress or you don't like being a doctor, because it won't work out for you. People also think it's boring, which is false, because anything will be boring if you go there for the wrong reasons. So you need to go for the right reasons. And then the other misconception is that it doesn't make a difference to people, which is not true. You get to provide quality care to people, and it's relevant to our population. So one thing that's also really important that I think that we always need to remember is that for us, solutions to Africa's problem need to come from Africa. So people often think, well, why do we need to spend money on trials when we've got so many other health problems? But the thing is, interventions that are made for European or American or other Asian populations are not going to work in our setting, because they don't have the population that we do and the epidemiology that we do of the diseases that we have. So the solutions for our problems need to come from us, and we can't rely on other people to give us those solutions. And that's something that I really, really feel strongly about, and trials helps us to do that. And so what's true at the end of the day is trials it's still medicine, and it's still about kindness, compassion, dignity, and clinically sound care. Those things don't change just because you're in a trial setting. So the last part of my talk is just advice or what works well. So like I said, I'm not going to go over it again, but your clinical acumen needs to be on point. You need to be ready for anything. You still need to be a good doctor. There's no question about that. Your patient always comes before the trial. I know some people will maybe disagree with me if they, that's probably a bit of a controversial, dangerous thing to say, but I 100% believe that. At the end of the day, you are still the protector of your patient, and your patient comes before any sponsor, any trial, whatever they tell your patient. The health of your patient comes first, and that should never change. You will get some pressure sometimes. There's a lot of red tape in trials about things you can do and things you can't do. But the important thing is that you should not lose your autonomy as a doctor. You are still your patient's protector, and you need to remember that. The other piece of advice that really helped me is to understand your team. So don't just limit yourself to being a doctor. What helped me when I first got to my previous workplaces, I rotated through all the departments. I went through QC, I went through the data guys, I went to lab. I didn't go in the pharmacy because some of our trials were double blind, but I found out what pharmacy does. So if you go through everyone, when it comes time and when people have challenges, you will understand why your team is having certain challenges, and you also understand how your job affects other people in your team. So it's a very useful thing to do. You need to know your site, your trial, your protocols like the back of your hand, and you need to be prepared for anything. So I'll give you guys an example. One day our PI wasn't on site, and he was on leave, and we had a surprise visit. MCC decided that they wanted to come and visit us, and it was a surprise visit. And it's a very scary thing for MCC to come and visit you without even telling you. So I got a call from head office saying, Task, grab a pen, sit down, MCC is coming, and this is what you need to know, and this is what, what's most likely going to happen. But it was fine because I knew our sites, I knew our protocols, I knew our patients, I knew what was going on. So I didn't have anything to worry about. I didn't have to go and cram anything. I didn't have to go and stress because I knew that what we were doing, I knew we were doing the correct thing. So I didn't have to be afraid. So always know your stuff and just do what's right. What you know is right, do that all the time. Then the last thing I wanted to say is, our country and our people better than any foreign sponsor. So use your voice, your intuition, your experience, and don't let people who don't understand our context let you or ask you to do things that are not appropriate for our context. So you need to remember that. And then these are general things that I'm not going to talk about a lot, but basically you need to have integrity, honesty, and just a really firm ethical code, because there's not always going to be someone looking at what you're doing, but you always need to be honest, even when nobody's watching you. Just do what's right and you will always be fine. Even if you make mistakes, if you've gone about it the right way, you will be able to sort it out. Transparency and accountability are really important. You need to own up to your mistakes because it affects your patients, it affects your site, it affects the entire trial. So you need to just be honest about everything. Transparency without accountability is just knowing what's going on. And accountability without transparency doesn't exist, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't hold people accountable for it, right? So those two things are very important. And then I also wrote, a no is a yes in a different direction. So sometimes you'll have a trial that fails and you've put so much work into it. And an example is one of the trials that we were very excited about, which was an HIV vaccine trial. We really thought that this was going to be something that was so promising, and it didn't end up working. And I already left our organization by that time, but I remember messaging our PI and saying, you know what, I feel so sad about this, but I know that it's okay, because every no means a yes in a different area. We can focus on something else. So don't be discouraged when things don't work out. And then remove the hierarchy, but maintain the boundaries. So within your team, you don't have to have a hierarchy, but you still need to have very good boundaries between your team. And then always have humility, because you learn from everyone in your team, especially in trials. Everyone's learning together. So always ask if you need help. And then you only really feel ready once you have started. So med school doesn't prepare you for trials. You don't even know it exists really when you're in med school. Nothing really prepares you for it. You kind of have to learn when you start, and you'll only feel ready once you have started. Yeah, that's pretty much my presentation. I think it was a little bit longer than we anticipated. But what I wanted to say to you guys is, even if this is just you were exploring this and you're not even sure if you want to do this, don't stop in pursuit of what you want and what makes you happy and in doing good for others, because you'll find it. Yeah, so I hope this encouraged you. And if you have any questions, we can discuss them. That's my LinkedIn and my Instagram. If you're too shy to speak today, you're welcome to also DM me and ask whatever you want. Yeah, but I am done.
Thank you so much for the very well articulated presentation, Tasanya. And just a question, I have two questions actually, but to the audience, if you have any question or comment, please feel free to unmute yourself and then ask a question after. Will you be sharing your slides, Tasanya, so that I can share it with everyone on my LinkedIn page?
Yeah, sure. If you want, you can have them.
And first question is, would you maybe describe the transition from working in private practice or just a normal hospital to clinical research? And then again, were you not afraid, or do you not lose that practice of medicine when you are in a clinical research setting?
Okay, so there's two parts to your question, right? The first part was about the transition from being in a clinic or a GP practice into trials. The transition is, in some senses, there's a lot of things that you have to get used to. Like, for example, we spoke about the admin that you have to do, doctors are notoriously bad at admin, so you're just gonna have to learn to do your admin. And there's small things like, for example, learning about timelines, that certain things have to be reported. Something that might not be urgent in a normal clinic setting is really, really, really urgent in a trial setting, because it's something that is still being investigated. So you need to learn to deal with those timelines. You need to be really good with getting back, responding to sponsors with, it's more the admin that is the biggest shift. Clinically, it's not there is a shift in terms of, there's a lot of red tape. So for example, a protocol can stipulate what, for example, let's say what the sponsor is willing to pay for in terms of investigations for patients. Whereas if you were in your own clinic and you needed to investigate a patient, you can do whatever investigations you need to find out the information you need to diagnose them or to help them. In the trial setting, if it's not part of your routine protocol, everything would need to be passed by your sponsor. And sometimes there's a lot of red tape and you get frustrated because you feel like you don't have that autonomy. But so those are the biggest transitions, is learning to function in a setting where there are very strict regulations about what you can do. But in terms of clinical practice, your second question, in terms of missing clinical practice, like I said, it's completely clinical. So it's not that you're not seeing patients. You're not sitting in a lab. You're not just dispensing medication. You're seeing patients every day in your clinic. We've had emergencies in our clinic. We've had we basically run a primary health, it's like running a primary healthcare clinic, because you don't only treat study related problems, you treat whatever patients come to you with. So if a patient comes to me and says, okay, I have I have nausea and vomiting and diarrhea, and I know that this has nothing to do with the study product, I'm not going to say, no, sorry, this has nothing to do with what we're doing, I'm not going to treat you. You're basically running a clinic, so you treat all your patients, whatever symptoms they come with. So it's completely clinical. So you might miss casualty because you're not going to see stabbed chests and gunshot wounds. So if you like that, then it's not, you are going to miss it. But otherwise, no, you don't. It's completely, every day you're in clinic, so you're not going to miss it.
All right,
Does that
thank you.
answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
If there's anybody who would like to ask a question or if they have a comment, please unmute yourself and go ahead. I think in the meantime, you can maybe transition me to the host, Tasanya.
Sure.
Okay, and
Cool.
also if you are shy, you can just drop your message in the chat function, and then we'll read it from there, and Tasanya will respond.
Oh, my presentation was just really comprehensive.
Hi there, how are you? It's Mule.
Hi, Mule.
Hi. So, okay, I have a question.
Sure, go for it.
How many people, like simultaneously, how many have you?
Sorry, Mule, can you please repeat your question? I didn't catch the whole question.
Okay. Sorry, I think my mic is giving me problems. Yes, I was saying, how many trials have you participated in, like at the same time? And do you think it's wise for investigators to participate in a lot of trials, and what is a lot for you?
Okay, that's a really good question. It's sometimes not actually within your control as to how many trials you participate in. It depends on your site. So for example, some trials may hire an investigator for their trial, but I was working at a clinical trial site. So the site got however many trials we had. So we did HIV prevention trials, HIV treatment trials, TB prevention, TB treatment, and even some kind of basic sciences studies. So at any point, I think there was a time where we actually had about 7 or 8 active protocols. But also it depends if, what your workload is. Stace actually just replied, we had about 8 trials at once, and I was on all of them. It also depends on your workload. So if you have more doctors, you can spread them across. But what would often happen is all your doctors would be put on all the trials. So if there is an emergency, you would be able to see any of those patients. So if I'm not on a trial, I actually am not allowed to see that patient. So usually we would be put on the delegation log for all the trials. So the most, I think, like Stacey said, we had is about 8. And the question about would I advise it, if I would say yes, and no. So the yes part is because it keeps you intellectually, mentally stimulated, because you're not doing one thing, you're not getting bored. So during one day, you can swap between many different trials and run between all your clinics, and you don't get bored. But the problem is, if you're not able to keep up with all your protocols, there's also, as protocols are changed, you get messages from sponsors saying this has changed, you need to retrain on this, you need to change this. So if you're not able to keep up with that, it's not wise for you to be on too many. So if you're just starting out, if you're a new investigator, perhaps you can ask your PI to only put you on maybe 2 or 3 trials, and you gradually increase the trials that you're on. Because that way you learn one protocol, and once you're used to it and it's in your head, after a while of doing it, you actually just know your protocols in your head, unless there's changes. So you can start with learning one, seeing those patients for a little while, and then you can add another one. It all really just depends on your site and what the workload is at your site. So it's definitely possible to see many protocols at once. It's very interesting to see many protocols at once, but you have to be sure that you can handle it. And if you can't, you need to let your PI know so that they can kind of taper that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? No?
All right, yeah, it seems like we don't have any other question, and we are out of time as well. So thank you, Dr. Tasanya, for giving us your lovely presentation and your time. And I'd also like to thank our audience. Thank you for joining, and we will meet again on the 23rd of July with another presentation. So thanks. If you require any more further information, you can just contact me on LinkedIn. I can give out more information, share the slides with you from Dr. Tasanya, and I'll also share her LinkedIn profile so that you can contact her if you have any other question. So thank you guys. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks everyone for joining.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.